Joining us now to talk more about the latest numbers is Siena College pollster Steve Greenberg. Steve, how are you?
I'm well, Liz.
Well, there's not a lot of surprises in this poll, I don't think, unless I'm reading it wrong. Okay, so people don't like the legislature, the budget's not done, they give them an F for a budget that's not done. I call that incomplete work anyway, so what's the big surprise? Well,
there's certainly no surprise in the 4 statewide races, little change from last month. And I wouldn't say it's dramatically shocking that the voters give the legislature an F, but to me it raises the bigger question, which is the voters just gave the legislature an F on arguably their most important job, passing a state budget.
Not passed, for the record.
Right. No, understood. But I mean, their most important job is passing a state budget.
Yeah.
And the legislature gives them the voters give the legislature an F right now. What happens in November? After just giving the legislature an F, do they return these people to Albany to be legislators next year, or do we see their anger carry over into November? There's been a lot of talk about an angry electorate. I've heard the talk for many, many years, as you have. I've never really seen it materialize. I'm starting to wonder whether or not it will materialize this year. And I think there's more of a chance than we've ever seen.
Well, that's what we're seeing actually now in the numbers, right? We're seeing by a margin of 61 to 25, voters have an unfavorable view of the Assembly.
Yep.
Worse for the Senate, 25% favorable, 66% unfavorable.
Correct.
Democrats, more than half of Democrats, 60% of independents, those key swing voters, and 75% of Republicans have an unfavorable view of each house of the legislature. The question is, when you're saying is, does this translate into action? Because this year is going to be very strange. Even though we say that there's all this anti-incumbent sentiment, what is going to drive people to the polls? Because the governor's race is pretty much a wash.
Right. And one of the things we also asked is, right now, if the election were held today, would you be inclined to re-elect your incumbent state senator, or would you prefer someone else? 30% say they're inclined to re-elect their incumbent state senator. 52% say they'd prefer someone else. That's a really large number. It doesn't mean as much in a statewide poll as it does district by district. And as you know, Siena did that 2 years ago. We'll start doing that again in the fall. This year, start looking at key Senate districts. But to have 52% of voters right now saying that they are inclined to vote for someone other than their incumbent state legislator, their state senator, has to give pause to state senators who are running for re-election, be they Democrats or Republicans. Because interestingly, the anger with the Senate and with their senators is larger among upstate voters and larger among Republicans, and it's upstate where Republicans hold most of the seats.
But you also need candidates. I mean, it's difficult for the Senate because, as we've talked here on this show many times with various different people, the Republicans have 4 empty seats that they didn't think they were going to have to defend. Now they have to put resources into defending those. Then they have to take back some seats. So it's not exactly, and plus because of the enrollment edge, it's not exactly a downhill slide for them.
Oh no, and in fact I think their mission is actually more difficult than the Democratic mission, because the anger at incumbent senators is mostly centered with Republicans and mostly centered upstate, and that affects their incumbents more than it affects Democratic incumbents. Plus you have a top of the ticket that is dominated by Andrew Cuomo, Charles Schumer, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Tom DiNapoli, and an AG candidate. And right now, forgetting the AG race for a second, all 4 of those Democrats are in commanding position.
Right, so why do voters come out at all if they feel no sense of urgency at the top of the ticket? Because usually the drop-off goes down ballot.
No
in
question.
Other words, I come in as a voter and I'm like, okay, yeah, and then I sort of get bored and walk away before I get to the legislative races.
The real question, and go back to where we started with this, the real question is the anger of voters. And that's something that's tough to measure, and it's really tough to measure in the summer. I think we'll be able to get a better read on it as we head into the fall. But if voter anger is there, they may come out to vote for Andrew Cuomo or whomever the Republican candidate is for governor. They may come out to vote for Senate. But what may really be driving them out is their frustration with Congress at the federal level and their frustration with the state legislature.
Yeah, there's actually a very fascinating story in the Wall Street Journal today about some of these congressional freshmen or almost freshmen, the newer members of the House delegation, Democrats in New York. Dan Maffei, for example, from the Syracuse area. You have
Mike Arcuri.
Mike Arcuri, a very dangerous race in the 24th.
Scott Murphy.
They say we're worried about trickle up instead of trickle down. We're worried about getting tarred by Albany, and Albany, of course, controls those redistricting controls the redistricting process, and so Congress is very aware of the state Senate and who controls the state Senate.
Absolutely, and it really is an issue of who's angrier, who comes out more. If you have some of these hot congressional races around the state where Republicans are going after Democrats. Democrats are not challenging the only two Republican congressional seats that exist in New York. But if you have upstate Republicans angry, coming out to vote for Congress, do they vote for Republicans for state Senate? Very likely. So that's a problem for the Democrats. It really is going to depend. We're not going to have a turnout this year like we did 2 years ago in a presidential election. Historically, we would figure to have a, 55, maybe 60% turnout in a gubernatorial year. Who are the people coming out? The enrolled voters of this state are 49% Democrat, 25% Republican. Is that the percentage of voters who actually come out and vote this year? Or are Republicans angry enough and Democrats complacent enough that shifts a little bit? I mean, because if it goes to, let's say, 45-30, that's a very different equation than 49-25.
Are you going to poll the congressional races eventually?
We're going to look at key congressional races. Good. We probably don't have the resources to do them all, but we're certainly looking at the two specials that we've already polled when those special elections took place, Murphy in the 20th, Owens in the 23rd. We're certainly looking at our Curie. We may be looking at the open Massa seat.
New York 29, right?
Yeah, and we may also look at New York 13, the Staten Island seat held by McMahon.
Yeah, a very good race. You know,